Thousands of immigrants from Central America are currently traveling together en route to the United States. Most of those making the journey are traveling by foot, and many are from the city of San Pedro Sula in Honduras, which has one of the highest murder rates in the world. But those attempting to cross are being met with resistance. Both Mexico and Guatemala sent hundreds of federal officers to their mutual border to try and prevent the immigrants from reaching the U.S. The move comes one day after President Trump threatened to withhold all aid to Honduras if the, quote, caravan of people isn't stopped. The president also tweeted this morning that he has asked Mexico to stop this onslaught, and if it couldn't, he would, quote, call up the U.S. military and close our southern border. Joining me now is Adam Yamaguchi. He's a CBSN Originals correspondent, and he traveled to the city of Tapachula near the Mexico-Guatemala border for an upcoming Originals episode that looks at the migration crisis. Adam, thank you for joining us. So what did you learn when you spoke to those people at the border?
One of the most startling things that we learned immediately getting into the city of Tapachula was just how desperate these migrants were. I remember we were driving down one road, and my producer Inez and I stepped out of the vehicle and started filming, and sometimes you don't know what to expect. You don't know how people are going to respond to the act of being filmed. And what we quickly encountered was we were just thronged by people who were desperate to tell us these stories, their stories. Women with children who were fleeing violence, sexual violence, domestic violence, and the scourge of gangs in El Salvador and Honduras. And it was just an overwhelming sense that this is, in fact, a crisis. So is it the violence that you mentioned and is the reason why they're fleeing Honduras and these Latin American countries? Violence is the predominant reason. I mean, these are countries, there are three countries really, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, that are facing this crisis, all stemming really from the lack of economic opportunity. You know, this begets drug violence. This begets all sorts of problems that they really have no other recourse than to leave. Mm-hmm. So for those people who make it to the Guatemala-Mexican border, once they get there, what happens at that point? Well, they can make one of two decisions. And before I get there, what I should say is that the river that demarcates the border between Guatemala and Mexico is incredibly easy to cross over illegally. In fact, it's easier to cross illegally than it is to cross legally. No patrols, no police waiting, no... There's a river. You can pay about $1 to hire someone with a raft who will take you over in all of 4 minutes. If you wanted to cross over legally, or take the legal route, you'd probably wait for at least a couple hours and risk being deported on the spot. Oh, wow. And this is video that we're seeing actually of that route, that river. What can you tell us about this? Well, as I mentioned, what you're seeing there are the rafts that people pay less than $1 to rent, and within 4 minutes you are across. And it was startling for us to see that. Just the ease of movement across this border here. Now, that's not the full story. Once you cross over, you're not out of harm's way. In fact, there are patrols throughout Mexico, checkpoints throughout Mexico, where the military has been deployed, where police have been deployed. But this is the first sort of physical obstacle, and yet there's really nothing standing in the way of people getting in. And yet, Adam, Mexico has begun to increase its efforts to crack down on people who are trying to cross over. When did that effort really begin? So this all predates to 2014. What happened in 2014 was we had noticed two things. Marked increase in the number of women and children showing up at our border, as well as this was the first year that we saw more Central American migrants trying to get into the U.S. than Mexican migrants. So this was a massive public relations nightmare for President Obama, who then put pressure on Mexico to do something. So we in effect have outsourced our border enforcement to Mexico. With the understanding that if Mexico controls the flow of Central Americans, that's the first stopper, the first filter. then we'll have fewer women and children to deal with at our border.
We saw that tweet by President Trump threatening to cut funding to these Central American countries. How are these governments responding? Do they take that threat seriously?
They do take these threats seriously. We're talking about countries that on average get about $150 million in aid from the U.S. in years past. Now that the pledge this year for fiscal 2018 is far lower than that. It's about $60 million for Honduras. Still a sizable chunk of money. The problem, though, and this really could blow back in our faces in the coming years, is, I talked about economics being one of the primary drivers of violence, the lack of opportunity. Well, without this aid, this is only going to compound the problems that essentially compel people to leave in the first place.
When you look at these countries like Honduras and their other neighboring countries, is there anything that these countries can do that could be an effective deterrent to prevent these people from leaving?
Providing opportunity, providing, the people that we spoke to, they're not asking for much. They want to provide for their kids. They want to make sure that their kids can go to school, get educated, have futures, not get shot down. So many people that we spoke to during our time in Tapachula, as well as in El Salvador before that, it seemed like everyone we talked to on the street had a story to share about violence, afflicting their family members, and compelling them to get up and leave.
And yet these countries still can't provide for these people. Yeah. Adam, I look forward to watching more. Thank you very much. Adam Yamaguchi with CBS and Originals. Thank you, Adam.